This presentation was actually put together 12 months ago by Alex Pratt in the UK for presentation at ESOP, and I'm listed as a joint author of it. So this should display properly because it's a PDF file, and this is about light curves. Now, as a preliminary, let me just get my own notes up on screen here. As a preliminary issue, traditionally we started off with occultation work. This goes back to the last century. Lunar occultation, asteroidal occultation. You stood at the telescope, the eye glued to the eyepiece, and you had either a stopwatch or you had WWV playing on your shortwave radio with a shortwave radio and a tape recorder, and the star disappeared. You say gone and back, and you extracted times, and all that came out of it was times, and that was the focus. The focus of the lunar occultation program as it was pushed from in the 1920s. I think it was Ernest Brown who was behind the development of the lunar ephemeris that lasted most of the 20th century. Wanted to have much input from lunar occultations to improve the lunar orbit, and then there were also issues about, in the 20s, they were starting to suspect that the Earth's rotation was non-uniform, and lunar occultations were the way of doing it. So most of the observations during the 20th century, and certainly from amateur point, was a simple gone back. And that was the same at the early years for asteroidal occultations. You'd stare at the telescope for many minutes on end, and hopefully you didn't lose your concentration, and the star, you'd call out gone and back. The advent of video has changed things a bit because initial use of video is you get the same thing, the time of the disappearance and the reappearance. But video is inherently records the brightness on a time against time. And occultation results, majority at the type of time resolutions we're getting are instantaneous, but you get double star events, which there's one plotted on the slide that's displayed, where you can see a step of one component followed by another component, and we see these in lunar occultations regular basis, and asteroidal occultations we're discovering binary stars at separations much closer than you would normally get, well, much closer than you'd ever get with any visual observation through any large telescope. And you also get effects of stellar diameter. You can get occultations, lunar occultations of M-type stars, K and M-type stars, where instead of being a step event, it's a gradual event. And you get some interesting issues in there, and there's a proposal. I was speaking to somebody at a conference here in Australia a couple of months ago, where they've been working with a spacecraft, they were doing work with the Cassini spacecraft, recording occultations of fairly bright stars by the ring system of Saturn. And the aim of what they were doing was to actually measure the brightness distribution across the face of the star and looking for ellipticity of that distribution. And when you start to look at the numbers, it becomes possible for very bright stars such as Antares, for us even with our equipment to start looking at the brightness distribution across the face of the star by looking at the light curves that we generate. And then you also have Fresnel diffraction effects that come into play. So all of this means that, well, I guess the other aspect of all this is sometimes you get people report observations of an event, and if you've got a query about it, then the best thing to resolve the query is actually to have access to the light curves that was generated, rather than dealing textually with what did you see. All of this has meant that, from my point of view, that the light curves that we are generating are in themselves valuable information which should be retained. Historically, we have focused on, we just extract the time out of the light curve, but in fact, the light curve itself is useful information in itself, establishing the parameters or characteristics of a double star system, or conversely establishing that a star system is not double at whatever resolution you can get out of the light curve. So that has led me to setting up a system with Visier, where we can archive our light curves and make them available to the astronomical community generally. It's giving true recognition to the observations that we're making and making sure that they continue to be available for as long as needed. So this presentation is about how we upload or handle light curves. The process I've got is enabled in Occult. I like to believe it's a fairly simple, straightforward of doing it in Occult. I've had some brief discussions with Tony about the possibility of doing something with our OTE where they could, Bob Anderson would need to do the programming efforts, but it would be possible for them to generate the files in the format that's required from our OTE, and I'd encourage Tony and Bob to do that, because it's just giving better recognition for what we're doing. So what this presentation is about is to just quickly go through what's involved in uploading the light curves. Initially it might seem complex. You try uploading a couple of light curves and you'll find it is straightforward. I'm doing it with lunar occultations on a routine basis, and the light curve process, it takes, on my computer, it's a 30-second process. It takes longer to measure the light curve with LiMovie than it does to upload the light curve. So, next slide. This is the Occult form for asteroidal observations, and now I've got to refresh myself a little bit here. On that form, you can see on the right-hand side in the second row, there's a box there for light curves, report and view, and we might be coming back to that. But we're going to look at getting observed light curves into Occult first. So if you go to the next slide. And maintenance tab, general downloads. The next slide. And you'll see down the bottom, well, that's come out different to what's on the original anyway. Interesting how things get displayed here. There's a box there for observed light curves. And I think at the moment we've got over 3,000 light curves available. And if you click that, you'll download the light curves. So if you then, and that will download them into your computer so you've got immediate access to the light curves that are available. Next slide. Going back to the asteroidal page, asteroid observations, light curves, report and view. You can also do this under lunar observation, but this is focused on the asteroidal ones. So light curves, next slide. You can view them in the asteroidal. If you go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Can you go back a slide? On the right-hand side there, lunar observations, view a light curve. And so you access the light curves from asteroidal observations or lunar observations. Next slide. And if you're doing lunar occultations, then if a light curve is available, it's tagged on a comma, one of the columns. There's an asterisk after the V magnitude column, but if you right-click on that line, one of the menu options is observed light curves, and if you then go to the next slide, and this is, I think, that particular star, you can see a previous light curve observed for that star. So the process allows you to quick access to light curves, certainly for the lunar occultation predictions, of past light curves that have been recorded, so you can see if there's anything interesting to look at or not to look at. Within that viewer, you can select stars, that box which is highlighted. You can specify any particular star by catalogue number to see if there's a light curve available for that star, and then select it and view it. Next slide. This is an asteroidal occultation. You can see at the bottom of the slide where the observer is Dave Galt for this event. And identification of the asteroid is there, and the date and the start of the light curve and the time intervals, all the basic information, and you can change the plot scale at the left. So if you go on to go on to the next slide. that just shows a lunar occultation disappearance with suggestion of, well, you can see there that the light curve is not instantaneous. In fact, it seems to have a little bit of a blip halfway down, suggestive of the blip is not of sufficient duration to distinguish between whether it's just a stellar diameter effects or whether there's a double star component. So the explanation for that light curve is ambiguous, but it's not an instantaneous change. And that's an event I observed. Now, I'm getting a couple of questions coming up on this thing. I'm not going to read those until I get to the end, because otherwise I'm going to get distracted and lose my train of thought. So I'll come back to these questions which are getting posted at the end. Next slide. Next slide shows a double star disappearance. A nice clean double star event. It's emphasised with double star events. This initiative, Brian Loader in New Zealand, he handles the double star data. Sent him the light curves and the event times, the two steps, and he combines those with similar observations from different observers, and gets double star separations at resolutions of about a milli-arc second, and there's some very good results can come out of combining lunar occultation observations of double stars at different position angles. Very neat solutions are getting derived. Next slide, which is a rather interesting light curve. This is Oliver Close in Sweden observed this event, I think. Oliver Close and Steve, let me just expand this. Oh. Well, never mind who the observers were. It's Tersadina, and it was an event observed in Europe. And hey, what an interesting light curve. And Tony, I'm sure you'd have great fun in sorting out what the event times of that were for that event. There's no simple disappearance, reappearance event for that. And the typical reporting scheme we have is, what is the disappearance time? What is the reappearance time of that event? Well, it's the reappearance and disappearance. The disappearance and reappearance are not instantaneous events. There is not a single time. And in fact, you can only properly characterise what that observer saw with the light curve and not with event times as such. Another reason to be archiving our light curves. Next slide. Here's an occultation by Pluto. This was observed by Brian Loader in New Zealand. He was well positioned and wasn't a central occultation, but he was close to the centre line. But you can see on either side, about a third of the way up, a bit of a plateau on both sides, which is one of the layers in Pluto's atmosphere. Again, for that type of event, it's the light curve is the critical issue, not the event times. You need to be able to associate time with the light curve, but a single time does not properly represent what was observed. Next slide. So what I've been demonstrating now, up to now, has been what you can view in the light curves. What I'm going to go through now is how to report the light curves. So for a lunar occultation, how do you do it? You enter the observation into the Occult Lunar Occultation Observe editor in the usual fashion. And then after the observation has been entered, with the observation entry being highlighted on the event screen, then you click the menu item, Light Curve Report, create a light curve report. Next slide. When you do that, Occult generates all the information required to support the information, the observation. And if you look down at the bottom there, there's a column called Circumstances, which includes the parameters, the axis angle, the librations, the limb slope, the motion normal to the limb, the contact angle, the size of the moon, position angle, and a cusp angle. That all gets generated in Occult, and that's an issue for writing one's own software to report a light curve for lunar occultations, is how that data might get generated. That's a problem. But if you do it within Occult, then all you need to do, and things have got mucked around here with this slide, but all you need to do is copy the light curve from iMovie or Tangra. In iMovie, there's a button added. You need to have one of the latest versions of iMovie, but it has a button for copy CSV, which you can see circled on there. It's after the Open AVI button. Click that, or in Tangra, you copy the light curve as a CSV file, and then in Occult, in the form for reporting the light curve, paste a CSV data set, and that just puts the light curve data as measured from either iMovie or Tangra into Occult for processing. Next slide. Once you put it into the light curve tool, it will go through some, if a time scale is already, well, it goes through a couple of forms which I haven't displayed here, which validates the time scale of the light curve, or allows you to set the time scale of the light curve, because time is an essential part of that. Once you've done that, it comes to a screen where the light curve is displayed, and you need to select the start and end of the segment of the light curve that you want to have reported. The light curve for a lunar occultation is inherently much shorter than is needed for an asteroidal occultation. You usually want to have longer on either side of the events in an asteroidal occultation than for lunar, so you can better characterise the noise issues. But you select the start and end just by putting the cursor on the plot at the start point where you think it should start, and click the cursor, then you move it to the other side and click it again, and you get a green highlighted issues. At the bottom of the form, there's two little radio buttons called start and end, where you can say, oh geez, I want to adjust the start position to just make sure the start button is selected, and reset the start position. You can play around and reset the start and end positions to get the selected part of your long light curve So you get the bit that you think is appropriate to be archived selected. Next slide. Once you've done that, there's a button on the form to save. Click Save This Report to save it on your computer. Don't send each light curve individually. The intention is that you build up a little bit of a collection of light curves and then email the whole lot at once. So periodically click email multiple saved reports to submit them. Alternatively, Occult will remind you. I think the default setting is 1 month. You'll load up Occult and Occult will come up with the things that you have some light curve reports to submit. Do you want to submit them now? And that form is down the bottom. Upload them now. Click yes, and it will automatically upload the light curve reports. The next slide. For asteroidals, this highlighted bit, or the bit there from the form for observing observed asteroidal occultations in Occult. Light curves report. Click the report button. That will open the light curve report form. It's the same form as for lunar occultations behind the scenes, but the form presentation is a little bit different because it doesn't have the lunar occultation details. Next slide. The first step is to paste or open a light curve it says open the light curve report. First step is to open paste the light curve data set, the CSV file, or if you've got it as a saved file, a CSV file, you can open that saved file so that you can put the light curve data into the report form. The second step is you need to set the event and observer details. For lunar occultations, the observer details come from the lunar occultation report format. For asteroidal occultations, you need to specify the details separately. Next slide. This is the form that appears to set the details of the event and your own site details. So specify the date of the event, the asteroid number, and it should come up with the name of the asteroid unless it's not in the database of asteroids that you got, and that doesn't matter too much if it doesn't have the name. The site details, specify your site coordinates, and you can set those as defaults so that each time you use it for your own home site, you can have your home site coordinates automatically pre-filled. Then you need to specify the star. Select the catalogue. There's about 6 or 8 catalogues listed there and a number. If you have the relevant catalogue installed on your computer, then get star coordinates from the star. Will populate the coordinates. Otherwise, enter the star coordinates from the prediction form and get IDs from coordinates. And so long as you're internet connected, the program will go off to Vizier and try to identify the stars identification and range of catalogues. Once that's done, click the button to transfer the data into the main form and exit, and that completes pretty much the extra information you've got to add. Next slide. Then at this stage, select the start and end of the segment of the light curve to be reported. As indicated before, the light curve will usually be much longer. The light curve, there is no real limit on how long the light curve can be. In the file that's generated, the light curve data is saved as a single logical line, and that logical line could be kilobytes long. It's saved with the same location as the lunar occultation light curves, and it's submitted in the same manner as the lunar occultation curves. Next slide. If you haven't been involved with emailing observations in Occult, this just shows you what you need to do to set up Occult. It's in the maintenance part of Occult. You need to specify your email address and the server name, and if you're lucky, that's all you need to do. If you're on some secure systems, you may have to muck around with that second line of highlights of email usernames and passwords. And if you have to get into that area, then click the help button to read up about what's required there. But most people seem to be able to get this to work. The critical thing is to set up the thing so it will email the results. Next slide. You submit them to through Occult. They finish up coming to me. Periodically, I then upload them to Vizier. And the light curves are now on Vizier for anyone to look at publicly. The catalogue is B/OC. Formatting stuff there again. If you go into that catalogue on Vizier, you can query the light curves using the star identification, observer name, any of the fields which are listed in Vizier. And you can plot the data by clicking, there's a column called LC, which has, it's a light curve followed by a number. LC XXX, well, there should be 4 X's now, sequence number. When this was done, there was 1,671 light curves. It's now over 3,000. And I'd encourage everyone to submit light curves for archiving. I mean, they are the fundamental observation you are making, and I think you should be making your light curves publicly available. Even if you think your light curve looks really crappy, if you're extracting data from it, which you can get data from crappy light curves, that crappy light curve should still be archived and made available. So everybody knows the basis of the observation, and who knows what is actually evident in that crappy light curve. Next slide, which is the final slide coming up. And this just shows an example of a Vizier plot. You can see, well, this is the type of plot you can get. You can play around. The plot options they have on Vizier for this is quite extensive. and you can play around. It pays to play around to see what actually is available and what you can do with it. They've done us a nice job in providing a very useful tool for looking at our data, and that that's light curve number 939 in there. Anyway, that's the end of that presentation. Now, there's a series of questions, and I think it makes sense if I go back and deal with the questions that have come up along the way. Tony, there's an issue that Tony raised with respect to John Broughton, drift scan techniques. You get a light curve. You can get a light curve out of a drift scan. I'm not sure. John's used as John Broughton, who's the guru of drift scan measurements and stuff. He's used his own application to produce light curves. Perhaps John, you and I perhaps ought to have some discussions about how we can ensure that any light curves that come out of the drift scan technique, that I can pick those up easily in the system. Ted Blank asks a very relevant question. If I analyse a video with live movie several times with different size aperture or other minor changes, we'd probably get slightly different light curves. How do you decide which is golden, which is the best light curve? That, in fact, is an important issue. It's a matter of reality that the quality of your light curve can be dependent upon the aperture sizes that you have selected for making your measurement, and how well the aperture is following the star. All I can say for that is you try to find what looks to be the cleanest light curve without having too much of a predetermined idea of what is the perfect light curve. But you ought to be trying to get the best light curve for reporting your results. You try to get the best light curve you can out of your measurements, and it's correcting for background noise is a major issue. If you have the aperture too small, you have issues of whether you're getting all the light from the star. If you have the aperture too large, you have issues of the effect of a large area of background and its noise, and whether your noise correction is appropriate. For lunar occultations, you've got issues with the light distribution from the background glare. You should be using the aperture, which has got two rectangles on either side of the star, and you try to align the rectangles parallel to the limb or normal to the intensity gradient of the background noise for brightness things. There is no simple answer for that. You try to get the best light curve you can out of it, which shows the features as clear as possible. David puts a note there, that's just a note. And Tony's commented on that Tersadina light curve and commented that would be easy to analyse with ROTE. But I guess one of the questions I have is analyse for what? If you're analysing it for where the limb of the asteroid is, that is one thing, but there's far more information in that light curve than the asteroid itself. There's information there about the size of the star. Brad notes a reference to a YouTube page. Tony notes that he likes to see 1 minute of data on each side of the event. And it'd be great if he asked if it would be extract data from information the observer's Excel report form. There's issue there about extracting data from an Excel report form that's used for reporting occultations. I'll have to talk to Tony about that. A bit about the presentation conversion. John Newman asked, presumably only report positive events only? Yes. If you get a complete miss, then there's no light curve to report. I mean, I take a complete miss as you don't have a light curve as such. You just got I suppose it is a light curve, it's just a light recording. But if you get a miss, then that doesn't get reported into the system. Although I could well imagine that in critical events where you've got somebody gets a miss, but they're just next to the event, that you'd want the light curve. Like that Amalthea the other month where the most critical light curve was the critical chord was a miss event. Well, we all wanted to see the video for that to make sure that it was actually a miss. John's commented the drift scans are a different format to those of the video. I need to talk to John. I can change the input into this tool so we pick up the format of the CSV files in John's software. Similarly, any of those things, it's a matter of if there are different formats of the data, it's just a matter of specifying a format to read the data in. Question for consumer, are positive TNO events reported in asteroidal? A trans-Neptunian object is an asteroid, full stop. An asteroid, the concept of asteroid is not limited to main belt asteroids. A TNO is an asteroid. Any occultation event involving a non-major planet we include. What I haven't included, and perhaps that's something I can expand, but I have to talk to Vizio about it, is occultation light curves of the major planets or their moons. At the moment, they're not covered by the system. And John Broughton comments that he extracts his light curve in Maxim DL. All I need to have is the data format of a light curve that people can generate, and then I can pick up what's needed. It's just knowing what the format is to read. I just need to get a series of light curve intensity levels and have a means of associating time with those data points, and then that's all I need as the input. And in building the software, I work on line moving and Tangra because that's where we get the bulk of the data, but it's easy enough to expand it to other systems. Are there any other questions? Well, in the absence of any other questions, I'll just like to encourage people to play around with the light curve capabilities. First couple of times you do it, you'll find it is, well, it seems complex because that's lack of familiarity. Once you do it a couple of times, I am totally convinced you'll find it is straightforward, and it is getting your real measurement data out there and readily available for long-term use. And it is, in many ways, it could be the most valuable real data that you're generating. So I just can't emphasise enough that people really ought to look at what's involved in archiving their light curves. Now, Ted says there's one question, so when I know what it is, I'll have a go at answering it. Right. Any other questions then? Because otherwise I'll stop talking and you can wrap it all up.